Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm recording on July 29th. So if you could, please make sure that you subscribe to all my channels. I've set 7 different channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. You can also be a member, a paid member on my Patreon channel. That way you can help support my work. In addition, you can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee. On my homepage, my website is the-studio-reykjavik.com. So please help support my work. Most of the videos I do are for free. There are thousands of videos out there that are for free. And that way, you're helping support the channel. Ask your social network to follow me. That's important because we're going to be going through tumultuous times, and it's very important that you get a unique perspective that I have to say. In addition, you should be following how to improve your health. I have lots of ways to do that. If you listen to what I'm doing, you're going to be able to slow down the aging process, increase your vitality, and improve your immune system. So please take my advice, listen to me, follow my lead, and you'll be doing much better. Some of the products that I have in my store, before we get to the video, this video is going to be about the decline of the US presidency. 2 videos ago, maybe 3 videos ago, I started talking about how society is looking negative towards the office of the presidency. Also, how presidents, when they're in office, are looking down on the office of the presidency. We're not showing respect for, and we're not revering the office of the presidency. So let's kind of learn a little bit about this decline in the US presidency. But before we do that, please help support my work by going to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and take a look at a lot of the products that I have. I have ebooks, but I also have lots of health supplements that if you stack them, you will really supercharge your body and get it. It'll slow down the aging process. It'll boost up the immune system. Some of the products that I have on the store, one product on the store that I have is the collagen with peptides. Now, collagen is really important for your skin, for your bones, for your muscular structure, for your tendons, for your ligaments, for joint health. But also, I have a profile here of different amino acids, which are important for just overall health. So take a look at that. There's the amino acid profile in this container. It's a powder. And there's a big scooper. You just mix it with your food or mix it with water once a day and have that as part of your daily routine. Really important if you want to help with your skin health, help with your skeletal health, your musculature. So do that every day. In addition, I have lots of different supplements. Omega-3, really important for your lipid profile, to improve your lipid profile. Take this every day, and what will happen is your LDL will go down, your HDL will go up. In addition, when you take omega-3, the red blood cells, they won't be as sticky, so you're reducing the chances of clotting. So if you've been following my work for the last 4 years, I've been telling you to take omega-3. So it's really important to take. Magnesium and zinc helps to support the immune system. So you should be taking this every day. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose of this. Vitamin B complex, very important for energy and cellular metabolism. The first 5 vitamins, the first 5 B vitamins, vitamin B1 through 5, is very important for mitochondrial activity. So by taking this vitamin B complex, your energy levels will go up, your mitochondrial health will be better, and your cellular metabolism will be better. So please go to my store and get the vitamin B complex. Many people have problems sleeping at night. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about the election cycle. They're worried about you know, specific things in their life, at work or at home, whatever. A lot of people aren't getting a good night's sleep. You should be taking this supplement that will help you get 3 cycles of REM sleep. This is a supplement that has tryptophan and melatonin in it. It has other things in this too. And just for example, here you can see. Hopefully, you can see it. The label is on the website, but basically, the tryptophan and melatonin will help you relax and allow you to sleep and get into 3 cycles of REM sleep. When you have regular REM cycle sleeps, night after night after night, what's going to happen is it'll allow you to improve your memory. You're going to have memory consolidation. You're going to be detoxifying your body, and you're going to be well rested when you wake up. If you are chronically deprived of good sleep, what's going to happen is your memory is going to go down. Toxins will build up, and you're going to have less energy when you wake up in the morning. There is research out there that shows that people that are deprived of sleep age faster and also have faster neurological decline. So it's really important. Sleep is a major component of anti-aging and just better health in general. So please go to the store and get the Good Night formula. Digestive enzyme complex, really important to break up carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. When we get older, our pancreas health starts to decline. So this is going to reduce the load on the pancreas as you're digesting food. So you take this will help to digest the food. In addition, if you work out all the time and you need to recover, let's say you're an athlete and you need to recover quicker, take this and you'll be able to break down those carbs, those proteins, and those lipids faster so you can recover quicker from your workout. In addition, this has fibrinolytic and proteinolytic enzymes. What that means is the proteinolytic enzymes break up glycoproteins. We understand that that's important, especially through the 2020 crisis. Also, fibrinolytic enzymes breaks up fibrin. Fibrin helps build up clots. When you have fibrinolytic enzymes, you can break up clots. I've been telling people since 2020 to be taking this, during the crisis and in the aftershock. So this will help to reduce clots. Not only that, it helps to break up glycoproteins. So please go to my store and take this as a health supplement, and what you'll start to notice is that your digestion is better, and you're absorbing the energy better from the foods that you eat. And you're reducing that load on the pancreas, which is really important as you get older. And lastly, taking a good probiotic. I have 2 different types of probiotics. I have ones that are in veggie caps, all right, or you can get it in the powder. In the powder, you get a little scooper and you mix it with your food. This is normally how I take it, but you can also get it in veggie caps. So both are very high quality probiotics. And the purpose of getting a probiotic is to get the right gut biome so you're able to properly metabolize your food, properly absorb your food. And there's better communication between your gut and your liver. And there's better communication between your gut and your brain. Your mood will be better. Part of depression, part of sluggishness is this poor gut biome. So it's really important to reboot your gut with eating proper foods, filtering your water, and taking a good probiotic. So please go to my store and get either of the versions that I have for probiotics. With that said, let's start with the decline of the U.S. presidency.
Why are Americans so unhappy with their leaders? If you take out anomalies like the September 11th attack, American trust in their government has been on a decades-long steady decline. Elections, for many, have become a matter of choosing the least bad option. the candidate who will do the least damage to the United States, and hopefully, with some luck, will somehow create some real change. Many others now believe that the system itself is broken, that it's unable to produce leaders that will help the public, and the only solution is for an outsider to come in and more or less break the system and fashion a new one. But how did things get to be this way? The United States has had its share of inspirational leaders, leaders that were widely popular in their time, and who were seen to have positively contributed to the welfare of the American people, and who went on to be venerated in American lore as one of the greats. But why do these leaders seem so few and far between? The United States has hundreds of millions of citizens to choose from. How can such a massive country be perpetually unable to produce leaders that its public is at least reasonably happy with? This video will look at two main things. One is the nature of the presidency, and the other is the public's relationship to the presidency. It will then argue that the confluence of those two factors all but guarantees disappointment and disillusionment, which in turn makes democratic leadership ever more difficult, which also in turn drives the best and brightest of Americans away from seeking office, and in short, gives the United States a leadership problem. We're going to start by considering the subject.
Hey, it's JD Vance. If you can't afford to donate because of the wreckage of Joe Biden's economy, I understand and want you to take care of your family. But if you can't afford to...
We're going to start by considering the subject from an angle that I think is rarely discussed anymore, which is ironic because I think it's an obvious starting point to gain a strong fundamental understanding of what we're talking about. And that's to consider the intentions behind the role of the presidency, and coupled with that, the design of the presidency. So we need to, for a moment, take ourselves back to the end of the 18th century. When the American founders were debating the design of their new government, they had just decoupled themselves from monarchical England. They had also just been traumatized by a popular uprising known as Shays' Rebellion. That put their thinking in a box. They didn't want to make a government so elitist that didn't belong to the people, but they also didn't want to make a government that could be taken over by popular passions. They understood that when crowds of people came together and became passionate, even angry, they could become both powerful and unreasonable. The theory goes that regardless of how intelligent any one individual is, as you add more people into a conversation and start reaching mass numbers, sophisticated debate becomes ever more difficult, and politics begin to resemble a clash of sloganeering, which can quickly become a hot-headed clash of emotions, which can also quickly become a liability for everyone involved.
This is important because if you watch the previous episode that I did, I started talking about the rat experiment in populations and how the rats start to become more aggressive at a certain population density that leads to dysfunction and actually population decline. So this is the video about the population decline in the 2054 blackout. So please watch that if you haven't. But there is this other social dynamic that I think is important, and a lot of people do not really think about that much, and that is this idea that group intelligence actually goes down as the population is going up. You know, that there's this almost like it goes to the lowest common denominator in the population. It doesn't happen right away though. You know, if you put 10 people in a room, you may, and they're all intellectual, the conversation is probably going to be pretty decent. But the moment you get 100 in, then you're going to start seeing that conversational level is going to go down and there's going to be opinions. Now, maybe that inflection point is maybe at 50, not 10, or, you know, or 100. But you see the point is that as you're bringing in individuals into the room, there's going to be fracturing of consent, and you're gonna it spirals down. So not just in terms of resources, food, water, shelter, but also in terms of intellectual space. You need also intellectual space to really have a properly functioning society. I think that's really important, especially when there's this big push towards the 15-minute city, and population densities would increase in these in these mega cities like New York. Well, that would mean that people would start exhibiting even more aggressive behavior because they don't have the physical or the mental space for health. So population density is a big component to this. But in American politics, everything seems to be 50-50 split, on the big subjects. We've kind of lost that whole 80-20 and just meet in the middle, and one side takes a little bit, the other side takes a little bit, and there's a consensus. That worked when there was more space intellectually, and there was more space in the United States with resources and all this. But as the country grew, there's less and less of that space, and less intellectual space because of media and the social media and the mainstream media, and everyone gets in their own little silos, right? There's less intellectual space, and we have gotten to the point where almost everything's 50-50. That, with all these variables playing out, are, I think, warning signs of civil war. Now, how that emerges exactly, is it a soft civil war? Is it a cold civil war? Is it a hot civil war? Is it, does it go kinetic? Who knows? But it's definitely, the signs are there that these things are starting to come to fruition.
So the founders believed that the excesses of mass politics needed to be kept under control. Mass politics, on the whole, needed to be kept away from the rooms where policy decisions were made, and in general, away from the seats of power. For that very reason, the Constitution itself was drafted in secret, the windows to the building nailed shut, the heavy drapes drawn. It was a lesson they specifically believed they learned from ancient Athens, which they believed drove itself to destruction through its popular political choices. As the main framer of the Constitution, James Madison described the problem of their system. Had every Athenian citizen been a Socrates, every Athenian assembly would still have been a mob. To the founders, these were pure democracies where all eligible citizens could participate in politics and dictate policy. They believed that the Roman Republic was, by comparison, much more stable and therefore preferable. The Roman Republic had some democratic practices, but also checked those practices against elitist ones, and vice versa. The elitist institutions could be checked by the democratic ones, which reflected the second fear of the founders, the fear of elites. Basically, everyone involved in politics can only be expected to look out for their own interests. Elites are no exception to that, and cannot be expected to act in the public's interest unless the public is somehow able to hold power over them. It's a balance they achieved by giving elites responsibility for setting and carrying out policy. But in a limited and ever-expanding way, the public was given the power to choose who those elites were. The public, every election cycle, could hire and fire them. But the founders were still worried that a group of elites could come together, conspire, and claim full control over the government. They were similarly worried that a large group of citizens could come together and claim disproportionate power, basically taking over the government and tyrannizing everyone else. That meant that power had to be thoroughly broken up and checked in the United States. Extending that logic out into the federal system makes it even more complicated. The federal government couldn't hold all the power, and any one individual state couldn't hold sovereign power. Power had to be broken up across the entire government, giving some power to larger bodies, other to smaller bodies, power to federal bodies, and other power to state bodies. Power had to be so thoroughly broken up and checked that it would be exhausting for any one group, however large or small, to rise up and take control over the whole thing. I'm specifically talking about how American politics are structured to deal with domestic issues. Foreign politics in the United States are, by comparison, much less decentralized. The president serves as commander-in-chief of the military, which is typically used abroad. and leads foreign policy by representing the nation abroad. But Americans are overwhelmingly and even notoriously concerned with domestic politics, not foreign affairs, and even historically ask the president to focus on domestic politics at the expense of foreign affairs. Which brings me to the first major problem that I want to talk about, which is American disillusionment with the performance of their presidents. Presidents themselves are undoubtedly largely responsible for it. The reason why is because they themselves set expectations for their performance. Candidates, presumably because it's what they believe they need to do to get into office, but perhaps to the detriment of the office overall, overpromise on what they can do. They don't just mildly overpromise, they wildly overpromise. And they don't just overpromise. They have to get the public excited about those promises. They spend much of their campaign traveling across the country, trying to drum up that excitement across various parts of the electorate. In the grand scheme of American history, it's a phenomenon that's relatively new. Candidates used to be able to focus on a much more narrow band of issues and had a much more subdued election process. Even the most notable presidents in American history, up until the 1940s, only had a few issues they're expected to focus on. For example, George Washington was expected to focus on interpreting what the role of the president actually entailed in practice, and was expected to, perhaps most importantly, retire once he had served his time, therefore setting a precedent for the peaceful, non-hereditary transfer of power. Abraham Lincoln was expected to focus on the issues of slavery and civil disunity, which meant that he was able to spend a tremendous amount of time and attention contemplating and crafting his approach to solving those problems. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was expected to deal with the threat of war abroad and the crisis of the Great Depression at home, which again meant that he could work thoughtfully through those problems, and if deemed successful, he would be deemed a good president by most Americans. Contemporary Americans generally agree that the president should focus on improving the economy, which is complicated enough, but beyond that, each president is expected to provide a vast array of solutions to an equally vast array of problems, an improbable array of solutions that the presidents themselves had largely pledged to provide. That in part could be thought of as a natural development. The longer the United States has existed, the more complicated the world it exists in has become. As populations grow, integrate, and develop, issues grow along with them, which naturally makes leaders attempt to step up and solve those issues, which makes the number of demands on the American government increase. But it's also, in part,
We're coming up on a major fundraising deadline, and there aren't many more between now and the election. So I am asking you to pitch in right now to help us meet our goal.
But it's also, in part, a change by design. In the late 1960s, the Democratic Party changed its primary process, which made the Republican Party, in turn, change its own. Up until that point, getting nominated by a party was a much more passive process. Many candidates wouldn't actively campaign during the primaries, thinking that having to do that would be a sign of weakness. The public had very little say in the process, and the parties internally chose their candidates. In 1968, Hubert Humphrey was nominated by the Democratic Party, despite not having participated in the primaries, and the backlash was so intense that a reform commission pledged to look into the nomination process, which would ultimately transform the nomination system for Democrats and Republicans alike. Under the new system, the public would now choose their preferred candidate, and the political parties would nominate according to the public's choice. That meant that candidates now had to participate in the primaries to win over voters, and would now make their cases for their candidacies directly to the public. This isn't to say that the new system necessarily affected the quality of candidates one way or the other, but the new system brought in an important change. Candidates would no longer have to sit down with political insiders and have a serious discussion about what could and could not be accomplished, and perhaps most importantly, how their platform would be accomplished. Candidates would now make their cases directly to the public, a public that may or may not be interested in dissecting the realism of their platforms. That has led us to a culture of one-upping on.
And from the previous videos that I've done, I've been talking about the CIA and how it's kind of encroached in American politics, especially right with the inception from Truman. Truman basically ushered in the CIA, even though he didn't want to, but then realized that he needed to use them to circumvent the growing concern of the Soviet Union and their sphere of influence in the world. So this is happening in the 50s. And then all of a sudden, as they get established, as the deep state or the administrative state starts to gain roots into government, then they start to lessen the reins with the party politics within these primaries, all right, especially in the Democratic primary. So, the point I'm making here is that you had the deep state needing time to gain some control, and the lobbying groups had to get larger. I'm not saying this was all orchestrated. I'm just saying this is the emergent behavior of the deep state. The deep state's starting to happen during the Truman administration, and it continues on because of the Cold War. And then as businesses start to have more influence on Congress and their lobbying power starts to grow, these backdoor, behind the door kind of negotiations on who will be a party candidate for the general election start to go down, because it's already kind of like pre-established that it doesn't really matter, because the deep state is really running it. So to cut to the chase here, it really doesn't matter who your president is, because the president, if they're not going to exercise their true power, they're not going to circumvent the deep state. And I think that's the real problem. Most presidents will go in line with the deep state. And this is where Trump went wrong. Trump didn't go against the deep state enough, but they were concerned about the things that he was saying and that he wasn't a pushover. And therefore, the deep state felt threatened and they had to go after him. Presidents, if they exercise their power, can start uprooting the deep state. But by the time they get to the presidency, there's so much being compromised and being captured, that the administrative state does whatever it wants. And this has been mentioned by George Bush Jr. This was mentioned by Carter. This was mentioned even by Trump, saying that he would have a policy and be circumvented by certain agencies. So.
Campaign trail, where candidates compete to offer the public something ever better than their competitors. In that process, they again don't necessarily have to be realistic. They need only to make the public believe in them. As a result of all their promises, candidates come into office with a lofty range of expectations on their shoulders. Expectations, then, that they can't possibly live up to. Power in the United States, as we've established, is heavily broken up by design. The office that the founders were especially keen on constraining was that of the president, regardless of how popular that president was. They believed that people naturally inclined towards the rule of one, which to them was a monarchy, but you could also call a dictatorship. Ben Franklin, for example, knowing George Washington would likely be the first president, said, "The first man put at the helm will be a good one. Nobody knows what sort may come afterwards. The executive will always be increasing here, as elsewhere, till it ends in a monarchy." So they were especially concerned with constraining and limiting the power of the president, making it so the survival of the country didn't depend on the talent and virtue of the executive. When it comes to domestic politics, a president can make recommendations, but cannot forcefully dictate what the law is or how the law is interpreted. Their main power is to see to it that the laws are faithfully executed. But even then, a president is one figure in a large department. The overwhelming majority of people working in the executive branch are long-term employees and are not necessarily supportive of and are not hired by the president. And the federal government itself is limited against the rights of state governments and against the rights of individual citizens of the United States. When the president tries to make change happen, it's been likened to a penny being dropped through the top of a machine. A president's directives are filtered by so many figures, that if and when change does occur, there's no guaranteeing it will create the result the president intended. Lyndon Johnson put the problem colorfully when he was advised to fire an employee who had just undermined one of his programs. Fire him, Johnson shot back. I can't even find him. George W. Bush's chief of staff put the problem more modestly. In the presidency, there is the illusion of being in charge, but all presidents must accept that in many realms they are not in charge. The presidents, then, who campaigned as if they had something like full control over the government.
We want to have faith again. We want to be proud again. We just want the truth again. It's time for the people to run the government and not the other way around.
Find themselves in office, having far from it. Presidents underperform them over and over, held against the standards that they themselves set. At the same time, they tell the public to care. If you look at the messaging from the successful campaigners since the mid-20th century, they tend to present two themes. One is hope. There's a rosy future available, they say, just tantalizingly out of reach. Hire that president, and that future is yours.
As president, I can help to change all our people's lives for the better and bring hope back to the American dream.
The other theme is fear. There is existential danger, danger that could reach you in the very neighborhood that you're in. But that danger can be averted. Again, hire that president, and you'll be saved.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Both themes.
Now, you know what happened when people voted for Johnson. You had a war in Vietnam. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and it's really important to improve your neurological health, improve those neuron connections, get those dendrites, those dendritic connections firing with those neurotransmitters, to improve your memory, to improve how the speed of thinking, to improve the neuroplasticity. It is important to take proper supplements and to exercise, right? Part of the exercising is getting blood flow, right? You need blood flow, good blood flow for the brain for proper function. My father is dying from ischemic dementia, all right? And slowly, but he's dying slowly, but he has ischemic dementia. And what that is basically poor blood flow to areas of his brain, which was the hippocampus, that led to his decline. Now he is in a nursing home because of it. Now, so take my advice. You need to do proper exercising. So you got to get the blood flow going. That's a little bit of cardio, right? Walking is a great exercise. Training your mind to learn new things, to build up that neuroplasticity. You get better connections, but also proper diet, staying away from processed foods, right? Reduce your sugar intake, and proper supplementation. Some of that proper supplementation is clarity factor. Clarity factor will get rid of that brain fog and allow you to be able to concentrate in your work or in your schooling. But also, if you're retired and you don't work, or you're not in school, taking this, even if you're retired, is really important, because you want those neurons to be firing, and you keep those dendritic connections, those networks in your brain active. When you start to age, those connections start to diminish, and so you slow down your thinking. Your memory isn't as good. But the beauty about the brain is that it can, in certain regions of the brain, increase or decrease neurological activity, right? So you can increase this by proper exercise, proper diet, and proper supplementation. It's really important, because if you just let the brain to atrophy, you're going to have dementia type situation. You're going to have a slowing down of your thinking process. Your memory will start to decline. Even your balancing will be poor. A lot of people don't realize that to actually increase brain health, do some balancing exercises. Really important to activate the cerebellum and reduce the chances of Parkinson's and age-related gait issues. So go to the store and get Clarity Factor. Really important. This will get those neurons firing, allow you to concentrate, and also challenge your mind, learn new things, read and write, and talk to real people instead of being a keyboard warrior, because keyboard warriors normally just age faster. So please go to my store and get the Clarity Factor. It's important to control your blood glucose levels. So get the ashwagandha root. This will bring down the glucose levels and reduce that inflammatory response in your vascular system. Really important. This will help with cardiovascular health. And turmeric will bring down inflammation. It's also an antioxidant. So by bringing down inflammation from glucose and from other things that are happening in your body, when you're bringing down those pro-inflammatory cytokines, what you're doing, those chronic pro-inflammatory cytokines, you bring those down and your body is allowed to heal. If you have chronic inflammation, then your body is constantly trying to fight this inflammatory response, and your immune system goes down. So, and you age faster, actually. A pro-inflammatory cytokine profile chronically you'll notice that people that are in that situation age faster. So you want to bring that down. Take turmeric and ashwagandha together to do that. Olive leaf extract, really important for your immune system and your cardiovascular health. It's a great product. It's new on my store. Please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and take the olive leaf extract. What this will do is it will bring down inflammation, so it's going to help the immune system, but it's also going to help to improve your lipid profile. It'll bring down LDL and help with HDL. So that's good for your cardiovascular system. Very important to be taking this as part of your daily routine. Vitamin D3, great for absorbing calcium. It is a gene expression cofactor that's important for proper cellular processes. And if cells are infected and need to go through apoptosis, vitamin D3 will help that. It's important to take this every day. If you follow a certain type of protocol that I've mentioned in previous videos, you can actually reverse arthritis, especially osteoarthritis, by taking higher doses of this over a period of time and titrating it down. But this is very important to take on a regular basis for just proper gene expression and calcium absorption. So go to my store and get the vitamin D3. I take 10,000 units of this. Now, vitamin C, important for your skin and your immune system. So please take this every day. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose of it.
Into some of our deepest emotions, and if we're to believe them, get us to care about the candidates and the life of their candidacies. If this happens enough times, people care, are disappointed, are convinced to care again, and again are disappointed. Disillusionment is bound to set in. What probably makes this all worse is that it's a job that's becoming, we'll say, ever more questionably desirable. The role of the president has always been difficult, but since FDR expanded the scope and operations of the executive branch, it has become a job that borders on inhumane. Presidents up to and including FDR.
Do you want the villains to learn before they have to pay the ultimate price?
That's such a Christian question.
You don't get away with anything. And so
Presidents up to and including FDR used to have relatively leisurely daily schedules. They had fewer responsibilities and typically only a handful of meetings on any given day. Their slower schedule gave them time to think, to deliberate over difficult problems, and to be spontaneous if spontaneity struck. The role of the president has evolved. The president's time, as one author put it, is now considered one of the most precious commodities in the world. As a modern president, your entire day is scheduled, even your rare breaks. Snipers sit perched on your roof. Your every movement is tracked. The extreme stress, pressure, and work ethic imposed on modern presidents visibly ages them. They regularly speak of the sense of isolation the office gives them. Barack Obama's national security advisor put it this way: to get fresh air, you're either on the South Lawn, which gets very confined, or you're playing golf in a bubble. You literally can't get out. If you want to watch a movie, you have to watch it in the White House theater. If you want to see your friends, you basically have to invite them over. If you go to their house, it's a whole production. They've got to sweep the house. It's ridiculous. You really feel that the walls are closing in on you. Obama fantasized about being able to put on a baseball cap and sunglasses and walk through Central Park and just look like some normal black guy. And even if he tried to do that now, everybody would recognize him. You never escape that. Once you've given up your independence, you never get it back. And one shouldn't underestimate what that does to people. As president, you'll be expected to make decisions on a bewildering range of issues that you can't possibly have expertise on, and you might even be entirely unprepared for. George W. Bush, for example, planned on having a humble foreign policy and centering his presidency around education policy and domestic issues, only to be defined by terrorism and war in the Middle East. The private life of a president is also increasingly less private. From the popular images you see of FDR, you might forget that as president, he had polio and lived in a wheelchair. The reason why is because there was a general understanding in the press not to publish images of him that way out of respect for the dignity of the office. John F. Kennedy's many extramarital affairs were similarly generally kept out of the press. Richard Nixon used to drunkenly call reporters late at night, slurring his words. The reporters, again respectfully, didn't report it. If you want to become a president now, you can and should expect every detail of your life to be rifled through, and every unflattering image or deed or phrase you've ever said or done to be unearthed and published, which on one hand humanizes presidents, but also when politics are heated, makes them into prime subjects for public abuse. As one historian put it, presidents had been heroes in the past. They became targets of derision by the second half of the 20th century. An important question should be, under these circumstances, who wants this job? If you were the best and brightest of your country, would you go for it? Anyone looking for reasons to not like a particular president?
First of all, the far majority of the presidents out there, their IQs are in the 120 range. All right. So they're not the best and the brightest. It is a fallacy to assume that who actually elevates to the presidency is the best and the brightest of their generation. Now, there have been, out of 46 presidents, there have been a few, like maybe 4 or 5, that had 140 or higher IQs. All right. Now, the far majority are in the 120 range. You'd be surprised at who are in the 120 range, actually. But the key here is to realize that it's not the best and the brightest that actually elevate to the presidency. They are the most maybe well-connected, or they have some sort of emotional appeal. But you don't have to be the quote the best and the brightest in terms of IQ to lead a nation to victory or into prosperity. And in some ways, maybe even the smarter ones lead the country into chaos and destruction, and lost economic prowess. So we need to stop thinking that a president is the best and the brightest, because the data does not show that. So we got to be very careful on that. Now, it's possible that, quote, the intelligentsia, the best and the brightest, are in the dark rooms making decisions, and they're the puppet masters, or some of the puppet masters, to to presidents. So maybe that's the case. I would think that the intelligentsia that is really making foreign policy, really game theorying this stuff. They have higher IQs than the actual people implementing them in office. So let's just stop with this idea that the best and the brightest ends up going and becoming president. The data does not show that. Far majority of the presidents have, well, the average presidential IQ out of the 46 that have been using a certain type of algorithm to determine all the president's IQ, the average is around 125. Average IQ is 100. Below 100, you're not average. You're below average. So the average presidential IQ is around 125. So it's above average, but it's not in the 140s or the 150s. Now, I believe there was one president that based on this model, one or two presidents that were near the 150 range. All right. And a couple that were in the maybe 2 or 3 that were in the 140 range, at the 145, 144 range. All right. But that's rare in the presidential world. In the intelligentsia world, you're going to probably have a lot of people that are in the 140 and the 150 range. But the presidents are not in that. They're rare. Those are rare birds. All right. So, just keep that in mind, that people that are elevated to the presidency are not the best and the brightest. They're just not. The data does not show that.
Now find them. Reasons, regardless of who they are, will be dug up and delivered. Which brings us to perhaps the most important change in the country, which makes the job arguably less desirable and certainly more difficult. 1968 was a traumatic year for the American people. 2 beacons of peaceful change, Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy, were both assassinated within 2 months. The Tet Offensive by the North Vietnamese also revealed that.
For example, I'll roll it back because I'm going on a tangent here. But let me roll it back. Now, see, who's it? RFK didn't do very well in school. Actually, he wasn't a stellar performer most of his life, but great speaker. A lot of people would think he would be super smart. He actually had in that 120 range IQ. So, so we have to be careful on thinking that when we are voting for someone in the primary or voting for someone in the general election, that they're, the best and the brightest. They're not the best and the brightest. They're just not. It's very few that have that, that special touch that actually ends up becoming president. And unfortunately, we haven't had them in the recent history of the presidency, in contemporary history.
Important change in the country, which makes the job arguably less desirable and certainly more difficult. 1968 was a traumatic year for the American people. 2 beacons of peaceful change, Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy, were both assassinated within 2 months. The Tet Offensive by the North Vietnamese also revealed that Johnson's administration had been lying to Americans about their progress in the Vietnam War, leaving Americans feeling angry, betrayed, and cynical about Johnson's administration, and turning large sections of the public against the Vietnam War. Many conservatives felt threatened by a series of Supreme Court cases that strengthened abortion rights and stripped Christian practices from public life. Meanwhile, an ever greater number of protest groups told Americans that the golden age they thought they had just lived through wasn't such a golden age after all, if you weren't a straight white male. To make it all worse, The costs of living were rising, and no one seemed able to stop it. Stressed and fractured, Americans blamed one another, and over time, more and more, consumed media geared at them that
Now, all
affirmed
this
they were
is
corrupt.
happening before really the implementation of the computer age. Okay, you're already seeing that's a stress. We were talking about how those animal models and how it showed that there's stress in society at a certain population density, and how psychological behavior changes. And we're seeing that in inner cities today. Now, when there's less stress because the economy is better and there's more opportunity and there's growth and you can move out of the city and all this stuff, right? Then the psychological well-being of the aggregate population starts to go up. But then all of a sudden, when that growth phase ends and there is now additional stress and less space, more worry, then you start having more crime and more mental instability. So you're having the mental instability you have this buildup of mental instability right before the computer age, right? The implementation of computers in business, right? The informational age, right? And then there is a lot of opportunity that happens after that. But then, boom, we're snapping that growth phase. We've hit the S curve. We've hit a wall where society is now ramping back up with all the stress. We see it in different forms, but we're seeing it with the BLM movement. We're seeing it with this ultra left agenda and wokeism and the destruction of family, God, and country, right? But a lot of the stress was starting to build up even pre-computer age. It's just it was masked during the Clinton administration because of the computer age, and we were able to kind of ride that wave of the internet with the Bush administration. But we've kind of like burned all that up now of opportunity and stability, and now we're going right back pre-computer age with stress, economic stagnation, debt, inflation, and all this stuff.
The United States polarized, briefly coming together in a crisis or times of relative prosperity, but over time, polarizing more and more. Unlike autocracies, where a right-wing dictator can more or less force the country to go right, or a left-wing dictator can more or less force the country trying to get anything done. Forging a consensus to pass legislation becomes more difficult. Or a left-wing dictator can more or less force the country to go left. Polarized democracies flounder trying to get anything done. Forging a consensus to pass legislation becomes more difficult. Successful action on one side is likely to infuriate the other, which then becomes energized, gets into power, and undoes it, making the country expend a lot of energy, but ultimately stagnate. Polarization also makes the job less appealing for presidents, who now have to decide to inherit an even more difficult position. A position that on one hand demands high performance from them, while also making that performance more difficult, and on the other, causes half the country to dislike or even revile them by virtue of having come into their life as a representative of the other side of the polarized sphere. Short of the extraordinary circumstance that brings people together, the days of American presidents having a strong majority of the country behind them seem to be gone. If they do anything unpopular, they can now quickly expect to have less than half the country supporting them, a precarious position to be in for any leader in a two-party system. Approval for every president starts.
Hello, everyone. I just landed in Charlotte. We have a tremendous rally, unbelievable crowds. People can't even get in. It's really great to see.
Approval for every president starts at a high. Many people, despite everything, more or less believed their campaign rhetoric or wished the best for the presidency and the country. But then time passes, and the country is still more or less the same as it was, perhaps a little better, Or perhaps a little worse, the president wasn't able to bring about the profound change that was expected. In the worst cases, presidents create scandals. They lie or even break the law. In the very worst cases, presidents can bring about crises or even national humiliations. A hostage rescue goes wrong. Banks fail. Questionable wars are started. It seems over and over that presidents can't live up to Americans' expectations. In many cases, Americans even find their presidents to be disasters. That has led to a downward trend in support for the American government, which certainly isn't helped by Congress, by its gridlock and domination by special interests. But Americans look to presidents to solve these problems, to take strong action and turn the country towards a brighter future. And presidents, over and over, aren't able to deliver. To use stock market terminology, the United States is going through a bearish trend in their attitudes towards their leaders. While we were at one point perhaps overly optimistic about our leaders, we're now perhaps overly cynical, even if it's a cynicism that was largely self-inflicted by presidents, a cynicism brought by their own behaviors and misbehaviors onto the office. It's also a cynicism that almost certainly makes their job more difficult, which in turn lowers the performance of presidents, which also in turn invites more cynicism. Whether the United States can pull out of the trend it's in, whether the American people can, one way or another, regain trust and develop a healthier relationship with their leaders, or whether the trend will continue and cause the United States to face the consequences of the decline of its highest office, remains to be seen.
Okay, so I think that was a good video about the decline of the US presidency. But I want to dovetail it with a video that says it's talking about the economy. Is it doomed or not? You know, maybe it is, maybe it's not. I'll put my 2 cents in as we're going with the video, but please help support my work by going to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and getting the health supplements that I have. So please click the link in the description of this video to get to the website, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60. C60 is a very strong antioxidant. You need a strong antioxidant to soak up free radicals. Free radicals will do damage to your cell. And when you do damage to your cell, that cell will either die or go into senescence. And if the cell's damaged, it's just not going to work properly. So as we age, we start to build up a lot of free radicals. And as we get older, the free radical buildup is quicker and quicker. And this is part of the reason why we age faster and faster as we get older. All right, so if we age actually exponentially, not linearly. So, and part of the reason is because it's free radical buildup. You take a strong antioxidant on a regular basis, like C60, and you're soaking up those free radicals, and you're allowing the cells to heal. It's really important to start taking antioxidants at an early age. This is what I did when I was 16. But there are new supplements that are out, such as C60, that are even stronger, and more potent. So please take a teaspoon of this a day. And what that'll do is it'll soak up the free radicals and allow the tissues to heal, and it'll boost up the health of the mitochondria. When you boost up the health of the mitochondria in those cells, you'll have more ATP and more energy, because the main source of energy is ATP. That ATP will allow, that energy source will allow for cells and tissues to work properly. In addition, by taking C60, you're going to improve the actual mitochondrial health in your neurons. This is why taking Clarity Factor and C60 together through a stack is important to help with neural health. Because when you're taking the C60, that it's reducing those free radicals and boosting up the health of the mitochondria. And you need a lot of mitochondria, a lot of ATP creation for your neurons to be firing those neurotransmitters. So to improve your just overall health, but also your mental acuity by improving the mitochondrial health in your body. Take C60. Now you can get it in avocado oil, in extra virgin olive oil, or in MCT coconut oil. But you need to take a teaspoon of this a day. Really important to be, this is a core to the anti-aging process. And by doing that, you have more ATP, you're going to have the energy and the cellular health, the tissue health to allow for a better immune system. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the C60. You can get it in a 2 ounce, a 4 ounce, or an 8 ounce configuration. It's really important to take C60. I take it every day, every day. Take it on an empty stomach is better for absorption. And if you work out, take it before your workout and you'll recover quicker. Why? Because when you work out, you're actually creating free radicals because you're breathing faster and you're breathing in oxygen, right? And oxygen, when broken down, will end up being a free radical. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get my C60 on the store. Take it every day. Very important. It's important to take a good multivitamin. I have an easy to digest multivitamin. You need multivitamins and minerals as cofactors for enzymes. If you are subpar on your vitamins, then your cellular activity is going to be subpar because your enzymes don't have enough cofactors. So taking a good multivitamin every day is very important for proper cellular health and proper cellular metabolism. Resveratrol. Also, it is synergistic with C60, okay? Why is that? Well, it's an antioxidant and it helps to get rid of senescent cells. By getting rid of senescent cells will help to improve the tissue because it's going to stimulate adult stem cells to produce new cells. And so the average telomere length in the tissue will actually be longer because you're getting rid of senescent cells. So it's really important. Resveratrol is really important. You know, some people say, well, if you just take resveratrol, there's not that much benefit. The whole point of anti-aging protocol is stacking. You need to stack it with other things like NMN and NAC and NAD plus and all this stuff, right? So if you stack it, like I'm telling you, you are going to slow down the aging process and your tissue is going to be healthier and younger at a biological level, not a chronological level. But all you got to do is look at people that are doing these protocols and look at the people that are of similar age and similar, environment that aren't doing the protocol, and you'll notice the ones that are doing the protocol are much healthier, don't get sick as often, and they look a lot younger. Like, for example, Alex Jones literally is younger than I am chronologically. But I am way better with health than Alex Jones. And I'm older than Alex Jones. So just pay attention to what I have, what I'm doing, and stack it. And there's the benefits. So go to my store and get the resveratrol and combine it with the things that I'm combining with, and you're going to notice that your body is going to slow down the aging process, and you're going to get healthier. The key is that you need to take your health in your own hands and stop relying on, big pharma. Lastly, lignans. It's a powder. It's really important to take to boost up your immune system. You mix it with your food, or you can mix it with water. Take it every day. This will also help with hormonal balance because our endocrine system is disrupted with just everyday life. And it's really important to get our endocrine system in homeostasis. So this is for males and females to help with their endocrine system, but also to boost up their immune system. This is extremely important, especially since we went through the 2020 crisis. People's immune systems have been trashed, and you need to take charge and move forward and improve your immune system with proper supplementation, with proper diet and exercise, and proper sleep, and challenging of the mind. When you do all these things together, you are going to slow down the aging process. Now, there are going to be people out there that take my advice, and they're going to do a lot better. And if they have chronic illness, they're going to mitigate that chronic illness or to completely alleviate it. Or don't listen and go down a road of spending more money when you're in your 60s and 70s because you have cardiovascular disease or diabetes or dementia or all these other things. It's up to you. But either way, you know, you're going to have to realize that you either take charge and do things on a regular basis to mitigate these problems, or don't do anything, and then you get diseases that were completely preventable. Most of the diseases in America, the big ones like the heart disease and diabetes, and most diseases in America are preventable. They're lifestyle choices. Okay, so let's go. Why is America doomed? And this video is probably gonna prevent you from sleeping, right? So again, make sure you go to my store and get the Good Night Formula so you can get your REM cycle sleeps.
Went the greatest economic expansion in history. The federal government had never been as large or as powerful, and was using its new sense of authority to establish vital social programs designed to protect America's industries while reintegrating soldiers into the workforce. These programs spurred the growth of America's new middle class, who would grow to be one of the most financially secure and well-educated groups of people in the world.
Easier said than done. We had to scrimp and save every penny to get the money needed for a down payment on a new home. We took this money, got ourselves a Federal Housing Administration loan, and we were on our way.
Despite this, many Americans were growing skeptical of the role governments played in their lives, even going as far as to question why America had entered World War II, which many retrospectively felt was a European conflict.
The problem now is future peace. That is your job in Germany. By your conduct and attitude while on guard inside Germany, you can lay the groundwork of a peace that could last forever. Or just the opposite. You could lay the groundwork for a new war to come.
While American citizens grew concerned by the ways their government controlled their fate, European countries grew frustrated by the ways the American middle class was controlling theirs. At this time, the value of the US dollar was tied directly to gold, and the value of over 40 other global currencies were pegged to the dollar. It was known as the Bretton Woods system.
Zhang Shikun, one of China's representatives, with Secretary and Mrs. Henry Morgenthau. United States Treasury Secretary Morgenthau heads the American delegation.
So, some people, you know, I've had a very interesting life, all right? I've been very blessed, all right? And hopefully, you know, I live a long life and I can reinvent myself, you know, and, you know, do something amazing, right? But I've been to Bretton Woods, but it wasn't back then, all right? When I finished my Ph.D., was it finishing or was I just doing the pre-dissertation work? I'm trying to remember. No, it was right before I finished my PhD. I was doing the pre-dissertation work. I went to INET, which is an economic conference by George Soros, all right? And I've gone to the Bretton Woods one and the one in Toronto, all right? And the first one I went to was the Bretton Woods one. I've been actually in this room. All right. And there's a gorgeous hotel. There's a great hotel in Brent Woods. And we had lots of economic speakers there. It was kind of like a World Economic Forum kind of setting. Now, when I was there were tables in that room with chairs, and people would have their laptop. You had media there. You had Bloomberg, and then there's a lobby through these doors, and in the lobby there are these huge fireplaces, and it's kind of like a ski resort kind of thing in New Hampshire. So there's lots of people that come in. This was in April or so that there was actually still snow up on the mountain there, and it's a peaceful place and a lot of history. But I've seen there were a ton of Nobel laureates for economics there. I met Stiglitz, I've met Ferguson, I've met Richard Koo. There were central bank and IMF heads at the conference. Even Freelander, when she was a journalist, was there asking questions. George Soros was there. So there were lots of. It was a big conference. It was like 4 days, I think, 3 or 4 days. And so I've been in that room. All right. Now I wasn't there when obviously when they were resetting the currency of the world back then. But it was a cool venue, but just that conference was kind of like the aftershock of Lehman. So this might have been in 2010 when this conference was. So it was my pre-dissertation work, and there was a lot of discussion. Who was right, Hayek or Keynes? So that the conference was centered on this Keynesian versus Hayek, mentality of how to run the economy. Did Bernanke do it right? And he was with the quantitative easing, and that was Keynesian, or should they have let these institutions fail? That would have been more something that Hayek would have done. So there was that kind of discussion there. But it was an interesting venue, and it was an interesting conference to be a part of. All right. So I've had these little tidbits of things that I've done in my life that are just like, wow, I actually have been there. I actually, when I was sitting, when you're looking at the stage, I was on the left side. George Soros typically sat on the right side when you're looking at the stage. All right, so he was on the opposite side. But I was about the second row of tables. So you have the first row of tables is like this first row of chairs. I was the second row, and I typically sat for the conference, and it was all day conference. Every hour had a different thing, and then you had lunch. You had breakfast, and then lectures, or the conference or topics, and then there were additional lectures throughout the day, and then there was a break for lunch. Then there was, and some days there were kind of like sessions, little sessions. They really did this. There were a lot more sessions at the Canadian version that they did in Toronto. But I remember the table, and I was at the second row, and I typically sat around in this area. Well, George Soros was always on the right side, and he was about maybe 5 rows back, maybe 6 rows back. He didn't usually sit near the front. One of the days he was actually reading someone's pre-published paper, and he was farther back. He was maybe the 15th row back. But it was a cool conference. So being and this is around 2010. I think it's around 2010. Maybe it was 2012, but it could have been 2012. But that around that time period, and it was kind of cool to be a part of. So when I see these kinds of things, I go, wow, you know what? I've actually been in these rooms, but in a kind of a modern setting, you know, tied to Lehman and not tied to the resetting of the world economy after a world war. But that's just a little side note. So when I see this picture, it's like, wow, you know what? You know, I actually sat right there around there in 2010 or 2012. I can't remember which year it was.
On the opening day, in his role of acting conference president, he addresses the meeting. To be discussed are plans for the stabilization of world currency.
It's so amazing. All this, all the stage and all, not the flags, but the stage and the arc, you know, the ornamentation, that's all the same. Wow. That's so cool. Now, in this case, when they were doing the speech here, they just had the chairs. They didn't have the tables. But yeah, I do remember it. Wow. It's a beautiful place. It's actually the hotel is it's a very peaceful place. Very, very peaceful. I have some pictures of it that it's very it's kind of like the hotel on Mackinac Island. It's kind of that style of that era, right? There are these hotels in the United States that were built in a certain era, and they have that kind of that almost White House-esque feel to it.
Agreements must be ratified by the governing bodies of the nations involved before becoming effective. Delegates to this monetary and financial conference pose on the hotel lawn. These meetings are designed to promote trade in the post-war world and to create a foundation for lasting peace.
I believe on this lawn that they're showing here, this was the back of the hotel, not the front of the hotel. Now, when I was there, there was snow, and it wasn't really cold, but there was still snow on the ground, and it was in April. And then at night they had to put firewood in the fireplaces in the lobby, and these fireplaces are gigantic. They're like that old style 1800, you know, huge gigantic fireplace. They're not little fireplaces. They're just like, they're almost the size of a room. It's really a small room. Let's put it that way. But yeah, wow.
The wood system was known as America's exorbitant privilege, as it resulted in an asymmetric financial system which incentivized foreign tax revenues to be spent purchasing US dollars. While it costs only a few cents for the federal government to produce a $100 bill, other countries had to develop $100 worth of value in order to buy one. While this brought stability to the global economy, the international community felt they were directly supporting America's increasingly expensive standard of living while subsidizing the cost of America's corporations abroad. As America's middle class continued to grow, so did the country's money supply. What was not growing, however, was America's gold reserves. By 1966, foreign central banks held $14 billion, but the United States only held $13 billion in gold reserves. From those reserves, $10 billion was preserved to protect America's domestic economy, leaving only $3 billion to cover all foreign holdings. The nation's weak finances threatened the stability of the global economy, all while America's social programs were only becoming less and less affordable. By 1971, America's middle class had peaked. It now included 61% of the population. But their gold supply had never been lower, and now only accounted for 22% of the value the gold represented, down from 55% when the Bretton Woods Agreement took place. West Germany was the first country to call BS and announced they were leaving the Bretton Woods system. To the surprise of everyone, the Deutschmark saw a sudden increase in value, while the dollar dropped by 7.5%. In response, Switzerland immediately began offloading dollars. France exchanged nearly $200 million into actual gold, and paranoia and fear were beginning to spread to every corner of the world. America's politicians needed to decide who they were going to prioritize, their own middle class or the global economy. They chose neither, and instead decided to protect something far more important, their control on power.
I directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
The day
Now,
before,
it's really
the
important.
US dollar was down.
Why am I playing this with the previous video? It's like we're losing confidence in the presidency, right? We're losing confidence in our government. And there is this destabilization of the US dollar around the world, you know, with the whole BRICS and the fiasco of freezing assets and trying to prevent Russia from doing commerce. So there are countries that are moving away from the use of the dollar, especially the use of the petro, the using the dollar as a means of exchange for petroleum. So it's kind of, we're seeing potentially the sunsetting of the petrodollar, right? And people are moving, and there are countries that are moving away from the reliance of the US dollar as a stable currency. The US has not had a permanent position of stability economically. Now, we've been pretty blissful of you know, economic activity. We've been good, you know, relative to other countries, but there have been these periods of instability, and so we're starting to see another type of, just like back then with the conversion of gold, you know, during Nixon's administration, abolishing that. But there was these periods of time where there was this instability, right? And then this kind of like new move to a different currency regime kind of thing. We're seeing that happening with digital currencies. There's this instability that's starting to take place. Less countries are wanting to buy treasuries. There's more debt in the country. We don't seem to be seeing huge gains in productivity at this moment in time through AI. So there's these headwinds that are taking place in the economy that may be forcing other countries to move away from US treasuries and the use of American dollars, and working with other currencies, you know, maybe a basket of currencies where they diversify the issue. Maybe they don't just focus on Chinese currency, but it's a basket of currencies. And that way you can reduce individual risk factors within that basket. Individual countries' risk factors are kind of evened out because perhaps other countries within that basket are doing well, and it kind of offsets. That's the theory. So we're moving into a new era. Now, what this all means, I don't know. I have some reservations of blockchain type digital currencies. The issue that I have is that it's a surveillance technology. It ushers in social scoring. It allows for meta tagging your activities. So this is part of the surveillance state, and I think that's a very bad idea. In addition, an Achilles heel of the economy is that if you lose energy power, if you lose electrical power, how are you going to do the actual transaction if it's all digital? You know, what happens if there's an EMP? You lose all your money. So, there's some practical issues. There's psychological issues, because of the surveillance issue. And it's locked into a system. You can't take the money out of the system like you can right now. You can take the money out of the banking system and put it in a shoebox, right now. But over time, you won't be able to do that. And so it's always locked into the system. You can move it within the system, but you can't really have it in your own possession. And the banks don't want you to have it in your own possession because they want to have control of that currency for a bail-in type situation. So, as we have seen during FDR's day and in Nixon's day of a changing of the monetary system in the United States and worldwide, we're seeing potentially a change of the monetary system today. And it has two tracks. One track is that it's kind of a bricks basket. And another track is digital currency. Now, what this all means, I don't think anyone really knows, right? And then you couple that with you put that together with the decoupling of labor and capital because of artificial intelligence, and it's just a powder keg that just is ready to explode because no one knows where is the stability. If you decouple labor and capital, there's mass layoffs. Well, if there's mass layoffs, how are people going to have money? They're not working. And so seems to be a collapse. And then because there is this social scoring and tracking through metadata on digital currencies, the people can't rise up. You can squash the people. Look at what Freelander, who I actually have seen over in Bretton Woods during the conference for INET, Freelander, shut down the means of commerce for the truckers when they were protesting in Canada. So she's already exercised exactly the worry that I have with digital currency. The moment you can freeze a bank or the ability to transact, you have stopped the protest, unless the protesters are willing to take it, other levels of escalation. Most people don't, and there's the problem. So I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin as a savior. It's a tracking current. It's a tracking technology. It's not a savior. If people are thinking it is, but it's not. Not only that, just think about it. You can't do if something is fluctuating radically, you can't transact for commerce. So if it goes up $150 or down $150, how do you manage a business on when you're selling a product? You need a stable currency, something that is appreciating or there's a lot of volatility. That's a trading commodity, not a currency for the economy. So people that are into Bitcoin, they don't understand this issue. You cannot have fluctuating value of a currency, either up or down, because it creates disturbances for exporters or importers. What's the value of the inventory when you have a business and what you should be selling it at? If there's a lot of fluctuation day to day or even week to week, the prices would have to be adjusted on a continual basis. So Bitcoin is unstable for an economy. Now, there's going to be people that disagree with me, but I know a lot about economics and finance, and I'm telling you that it's a tracking currency, it's a tracking technology, means for social scoring, means for social control, and it's not stable. Now, that's Bitcoin with that blockchain technology. What the Federal Reserve is going to do is have their own digital currency on a blockchain. And they will control the fluctuation of the currency by adjusting the actual monetary base. Maybe in real time, maybe not, I don't know. But it's not, the economy isn't going to be running on Bitcoin. I know that for a fact, because there's no way in hell that the Federal Reserve is going to relinquish power. That would involve a war. And I'm pretty sure that the people that are doing that are investing in Bitcoin and all this, it's a speculative thing and they can make money doing it, but it's not a currency to run an economy. There's the difference. It's a speculative investing asset, not a real currency. And if people say that it's a real currency, they don't know what they're talking about.
By gold. But after Nixon's announcement, it was backed by nothing. And just as the whole world was tuning in to see what America's grand plan was, Watergate happened.
I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort.
Then a steel crisis snowballed into a nationwide recession, and the Dow Jones began a historic 45% decline. Then the Arab countries triggered a global oil crisis, and it sent the entire world into chaos. As the American public grew increasingly frightened by what the world had become, the US prepared to leave Vietnam after having spent 20 years and hundreds of billions of dollars fighting a war that had accomplished nothing. The public had never been so convinced that the powerful men in Washington did not have their best interests at heart. And it was at this moment the most powerful of those men, President Ford, appointed Alan Greenspan his Council of Economic Advisors. Greenspan didn't know it yet, but this appointment marked the beginning of a historic rise to power. And at the climax of our story, Greenspan would be the hero to restore stability back into the world.
Key point that I'm making here is that all these problems are building up in a pre-computer age, pre-informational age. Okay, and we can learn from this and where we're going with this whole dystopia with the decoupling of labor and capital.
Be free, can't you see? Come on, little girl. All you gotta do is set me free, oh yeah. Look up the sky, all the stars above you, all the stuff the same.
But across the country, in California, a group of innovators, intellectuals, and nerds were developing a new vision for a more stable world, one that would be made possible by revolutionary new technology called computers.
Oh, it's a Wayne. Wow.
The Californians believed that computers, unlike politicians, could be trusted. The expansion of the digital world was going to liberate people in the real world from the hidden agendas of politics, ushering in a future where the integrity of decisions and processes would be protected by machines. But at that very same moment in time, a new president of the United States was being elected, and he believed in the complete opposite. He was convinced that he could use traditional political power to make not just America, but the whole world a better place. And all of them, the economists, the computer nerds, the politicians, and even the new president, were completely wrong. At the end of 1992, Alan Greenspan went to meet with the newly elected president, President Bill Clinton. Greenspan, now head of the US Federal Reserve, informed the new president that his campaign promises for more social reform were entirely impossible. America's debt to GDP ratio had risen from 35% to nearly 60% over the past 2 decades, and Greenspan warned the president that if he borrowed any more money to pay for his political program, interest rates would need to rise, and President Clinton would begin his new term in office with a stock market crash. Greenspan then proposed a radical alternative. Clinton should do the very opposite. He should cut government spending. If he did, interest rates would go down and a wave of credit, innovation, and commerce would create a boom in the economy. Greenspan's idea was simple. Clinton should let the markets, not politics, transform America. Clinton agreed, and years later, Alan Greenspan said he was shocked that his Greenspan had predicted a boom did begin. And as share prices rose higher and higher, a belief started to grow.
And this is the reason why I was saying, this is the reason why I'm saying that it's not the best and the brightest that get into office, even if they have economic degrees or kind of a polyeconomic or economic history kind of degree. Bill Clinton's not dumb, but he's not the best of the brightest. Actually, I believe his IQ is in the 130 range. So he's not in the 140s or the 150s. So with Bill Clinton, he really was naive on how really the economy really worked. This idea that if you keep on spending at the federal level, especially if you already are in debt, doesn't really generate new productive activity. You need to let the chaos of the market and through technological innovation and people making things, and that innovation that takes place by making things, more products will come out, more people will be hired, and there's going to be a larger tax base because there's more activity. And with that larger tax base, what will happen is now you can pay down the debt. The problem is that our politicians are hoping that there will be this growth of higher productivity, and so they laden the society with even more debt because they think that, well, there's just a projection of growth and we'll just be able to do it. And so they're now laying more social programs. Well, you'll have these periods of time where you have these huge quantum leaps in technology, the informational age, or steam engine and mechanization of processes for, let's say, making clothing or cars or whatever. You have these leaps in technology where the society will become productive and then it'll be less productive. So there's a flux that's taking place. We've gone through an expansionary flux because of the informational age, the computer age. And we are seeing contraction of that, and we're less productive. Yet we have all this, the society's burdened by debt. And that we're in the hopes of another flux with the AI. The problem is that this AI can make AI. This AI can make robots, and robots make robots, and there's less and less need for humans. Now the question is, we'll have more free time, will we become more creative, or will go down in a spiral? I suspect that we go down in a spiral because we're going to lose our sense of humanity. Plus you have the stress, plus you have the higher densities of the population that creates these emotional disturbances in society, and you have more crime and more social disruption, right? But we potentially are going in through a new flux, but it's a different type of flux. An AI flux is going to be different than the informational age flux, because it was the speed of information and we used it and more people had jobs. Well, will AI produce more jobs or have job destruction? We don't know yet. I suspect job destruction. So, so the point here is that you have presidents that they're not the smartest in the room. They're not the best and the brightest. And they don't really fully understand how important it is to reduce regulation up to a point, because you don't want laissez-faire capitalism, right? Laissez-faire capitalism will harm society, but over-regulating will harm capitalism. So there's a middle ground. There's pragmatism in this. I kind of wrote about this a long time ago, about economic pragmatism. And this was dealing with Hayek and Keynes, and in my chaos theory book, I talk about this economic pragmatism. But this whole idea of economic pragmatism, you need this kind of like middle ground. You need enough regulation, but not too much, not too little. The Goldilocks. So you have to be pragmatic about it. Same thing with monetary policy. You have to be inflationary at times, but you also have to be contractionary at times. And that my take on this is that you don't want to be a complete Keynesian in monetary policy, nor a complete person that follows Hayek. You want to stabilize the economy, but let the economy run on its own and only interject when it's needed. I think monetary policy interjects too much. It's too biased to Keynes philosophies than to Hayek, and because of that, it's caused a lot of economic disturbances in the world, not just in the United States. That's my take on it. Others would say they want more Hayek kind of policies in for the Federal Reserve, or others may be saying that we need more Keynesian policies. I don't think so. I think that there's this economic pragmatism is really important. But politicians, they have this idea that they can just write into law, some government spending that's really going to fix things. And the reality is that you got to go, why? You have to get back to these root questions, like, why is the society not as productive? And it may be the educational base needs to improve, or that there's too much debt, and that the debt load has to be relieved before people are willing to invest, or in their education, or in businesses, or whatever. So this idea that you can just that you have a problem and just the government is going to be here and just spend more money is not the solution. The solution may actually be that the government does the complete opposite, which is what Greenspan is saying here. All right. Now, that's not the case all the time. Sometimes if the government hasn't been intervening at all, and there's laissez-faire capitalism or whatever, then you have to intervene and create some regulation to improve the water quality or whatever, right? So there's times to act, and there's many times not to act. That's economic pragmatism.
Different to those in the past, this boom wasn't going to run out of steam. And the reason was this new thing people were calling computers. The computers allowed the banks to create complex mathematical problems that could predict the risks of making any type of investment. This had enormous implications, because if a risk could be predicted, then it could be balanced by hedging against it. For the banks and the hedge funds, this was a new utopia. The chaotic markets of the 1970s had now been replaced by stability. The computers, not traders, would decide what to trade. The algorithms, not fund managers, would decide what factors to consider. And computers, not economists, would tell us what stability even looked like.
I remember these commercials for the Intel.
The computers fundamentally revolutionized banking, as it enabled the banks to lend money to millions of people they would have previously never entertained. At the same time, it became clear that the internet and other computer networks were going to enable businesses to respond to business needs faster than ever before. It seems that the vision the Californian ideologists put forward was beginning to take shape. This newfound economic stability made people believe that perhaps the future could be run by the will and needs of the people and not the political elites who had allowed the world to become such a chaotic place in the 70s. Optimism was everywhere, and people were referring to this era as the new economy, and was still very worried. Alan Greenspan. Every day he studied reports which illustrated what was really happening inside America's factories and businesses. Reported profits continued rising. The stock market continued rising. But the details of the reports illustrated that the country's actual economic productivity had hardly changed at all. Greenspan could not understand how this was happening. Something must have been terribly wrong. And in 1996, Greenspan made a speech warning the world of what he had learned. He said that America's stock market was overvalued, and the reason, irrational exuberance.
Now, this is important
banks and
because
politicians-
this is important because we are starting to see this in the massive flood of investment in artificial intelligence with certain types of companies like NVIDIA. And there are investors out there already saying this is a bubble and they're not sure if it's going to pop right now, but this thing is way overvalued. The top, I believe it's the top 5. I was watching a video, I think it was on Bloomberg. Maybe it was Fox Business. Maybe I'll be able to find it somewhere. But the top 4 artificial intelligence companies that are investing in artificial intelligence, their market cap, market capitalization, the value at the market level, not the real value of the company, but the market, the stock market value of the top 4 could buy the full economy of the United Kingdom. That is impossible to be real. It's the point here is that there's an overinvestment in artificial intelligence. Something similar happened even during the tech bubble. So, I'll look at the market, S&P 500, and give you my new target points. But it probably has more room to move forward, but I am really concerned at the 5,800 on the S&P 500 as being a kind of a ceiling point where there's going to be maybe a 20% drop in the market after it reaches that point, or around the 6,000 mark. Those 2 points kind of give me some worry, especially if Trump gets into office. There are going to be people that will try to create a sell-off, which would put in the mainstream news on how bad Trump is for the economy, and then move the power back to the Democrats for the Senate and for the House. So there's these, this is a kind of almost like a plan B. If Trump does get into office, how to circumvent his presidency and the power of the Republican Party. So, you know, but I need to take a look at the charts and analyze it a little bit more to give you a little bit more insight on that. But there's over investment in artificial intelligence. Now, does that mean that the bubble bursts right now? Does that mean the bubble bursts this year? Probably not. It probably will burst next year or the year after, sometime in that first 2 years, because they want to time it just right to be able to hurt Trump if Trump gets into office. Now, if Harris gets into office, then, you know, they don't really want it to fail on a Democratic watch, because it will automatically force, you know, control of Congress for the Republican Party. So, you know, but the weird thing about economics is that there's this chaotic behavior that may go against what you try to orchestrate. You know, there are people that try to short the market just because of the economic behavior of the market, the emergent behavior of the market. These people can't do what they want, and they can't short. The market's not willing to go down. It's non-responsive. Other times, the market may actually become responsive because of this just emergent behavior that's taking place in the market. So people think, well, it's so easy to just bring down the market, just have, you know, really powerful people just start selling off. Well, not necessarily, because there's so many interactions at the agent-based level of the economy and of the market that even powerful players may not be able to actually move the market in the direction they want it to, especially if they want to short it. Shorting markets are hard. You can make a lot of money when you're successful in a short amount of time, but shorting markets is extremely hard. There is a natural tendency to move upward with these markets, just like there's a natural tendency in biology, biological systems, to find a way to live, find a way to survive. There's a natural tendency to do that. The market's the same way. It has the same kind of atomistic mechanism, you know, that there's an emergent behavior of the market that wants to move up and not go down. There's fluctuations. Now, there are people that try to manipulate, but it doesn't mean that they always can manipulate. Someone that is a simpleton that, you know, thinks very simple, they think that, oh, the puppet masters, everything that happens, you know, is all orchestrated and they have complete control. No, they don't. You know, there are these things that happen that emerge. These social systems, there's emergent behaviors that happen. They're completely independent of the whims of puppet masters. But there are times when the conditions are right and the puppet masters can move the market in a direction that they want easier. Okay. So, but artificial intelligence investing doesn't really match the fundamentals. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't keep on going up for a while. It can deviate from fundamentals for quite a long time before it crashes. But as it climbs up more and more, when it does crash, it hurts the economy even more. It's better to crash now than to crash two years from now. But who knows? But definitely there's too much investing in artificial intelligence. And that's one of the signs here. One of the signs or one of the lessons learned from this.
Immediately attacked Greenspan for his comments. He was criticized by liberals, conservatives, bankers, leaders of American industry, and even the American public. It was at this moment that Greenspan did something incredible. He changed his mind. Greenspan decided that he was wrong. The computers were actually increasing productivity, but it was happening in new ways that his data was unable to capture. This made no sense, but it was exactly what everyone wanted to hear. He went back to see Clinton, this time to tell him the good news. He said that despite his initial observations, the US really was entering a new economy, and compared the discovery to stumbling upon a new planet. The boom continued. Clinton looked like a hero, and since the free markets were being run by computers, the chaos of the past seemed like it would stay in the past, and everyone could just chill out and enjoy the new economy.
I hope that in this season,
Larry King is interviewing, I remember actually that show with Larry King, with Clinton, Hillary Clinton. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the collagen. This has also peptides in it, which are amino acids. Here's the amino acid profile. It has some great amino acids. But this is really important to take every day to help with your skin, help with your bones, help with your joints, ligaments, tendons, right? Take this every day. You can take it with just water or mix it with food. I usually mix it with food. It has a big scooper in it. You take 1 scoop a day. In addition, I have these deodorants that I have partnered up with Rainbow Herbals. We've created these really high quality deodorants in peppermint, lavender, and tea tree, and in citrus. So please go to the store and get a couple bars of this for your household. It's for males and females. It's made from essential oils from the Himalayas. It's all natural, it has no aluminum, and it has no baking soda in it. So please go to the store and get the deodorants. It also helps to detoxify the body. So it's dual purpose. And we've also developed the Even Better Bar, which is a skincare bar that you apply on your skin. And what will happen is your skin will be smoother and softer if you apply it every day on your skin or every other day. In addition, it will help to reduce muscle pain, a itch from a bug bite, and it'll help to heal a wound, an abrasion, or a minor burn. So this is a really important bar to have in your medicine cabinet. So please go to my store and get the Even Better Bar. It's also made from essential oils from the Himalayas. I have a very high quality toothpaste, so please go to the store and get this toothpaste. It has no fluoride in it, no fluoride. It will whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, neutralize pathogens, and improve your gum line by reducing inflammation. And with proper oral hygiene, you're going to improve your cardiovascular health. People don't realize that good oral hygiene is correlated to good cardiovascular health. So please go to my store and get the toothpaste that I have here, the Structural Nail Silver Toothpaste.
people will stop and think about how they can bring more love into their own lives and in the lives of people around them. And I hope they will also stop for a minute and maybe put themselves in the shoes of another person and think about how they can further goodwill and peace by being more understanding of each other.
What'd you get, Phil?
Oh, that's a secret. I can't tell you that. I know, but I can't tell you because we don't open till Christmas morning.
Be surprised.
Sure.
By 1997, the American boom was reshaping the whole world. It seemed as though all you needed to do to create stability was throw money at the problem. Economists and bankers now began to envision the world as one giant economic system, one that should be dominated by the American government. It seemed that the best way to bring economic stability to the rest of the world was to open it up to the free flow of capital. In the sandbox that the US would use to test this hypothesis would be Southeast Asia. Under American pressure, countries like South Korea and Thailand had given up all sovereign restrictions so that the American dollar could flood into the economy. This fueled an economic boom known as the Asian miracle. But Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors were worried that much of the money was being wasted. Instead of strengthening the Asian economies, the capital was financing highly speculative housing projects, which were directly creating property bubbles in the economies receiving aid. The head of the council, Joseph Stiglitz, argued that
And the
these
lesson
investments
learned from this is that as we have a declining market in the United States, when this bubble for AI starts to burst, all right, the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates. And what's going to happen is that hot money is going to move into these real estate deals to build out more construction to help the economy out, right? And there's going to be hot money that's going overseas too, right? And when this all happens, we're recreating this problem.
would inevitably leave the economies of Thailand and South Korea decimated. Joseph Stiglitz wanted to persuade the president to stop the excessive lending that was creating a property bubble in Asia, but his messages were being blocked by the higher-ranking Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Rubin.
Are lots of people have assets? I think it would be read as a sign that our system isn't working right. And I think that would be very unsettling in a broader sense. And unsettlement, if that's a word, and uncertainty tend not to be conducive to healthy markets.
Before Rubin became Secretary of the Treasury, he ran Goldman Sachs. It was under his leadership that the banks had created and implemented many of the computer models that were now running America's economy. Rubin had his own revolutionary vision for a world system, one completely open to the free flow of capital. Joseph Stiglitz, who headed Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors, was convinced that Rubin's Treasury Department was stopping his warnings from reaching the president, and in doing so, Joseph Stiglitz argues that Rubin and the Treasury had effectively become agents of the financial world, embedded in the heart of the federal government.
That if for the first time in the history of the United States, we defaulted on our full faith and credit, I think it would create a question mark about our willingness to meet our commitment. It's not willingness. It's about our commitment to meeting obligations that I think would affect what money would cost 20 years from now.
Rubin's time at Goldman Sachs illustrates the close ties between America's Treasury and financial markets. And as far as Wall Street was concerned, Stiglitz's property bubble warnings were just threats to America's economic prosperity. And even more importantly, it was threatening their profits. It was under this context that Rubin's Treasury office worked extremely hard to ensure President Clinton never became aware of the severity of what was going on. And they were able to get away with this because the president was very distracted.
We're getting up and I'm like, I love you, butthead. I called him butthead. You didn't. I did. And what did he say? That was it. He just kind of hung up. I hung up. I was like, oh my God, what the hell just came out of my mouth? Butthead. Butthead. We didn't have sex, Linda. Well, what do you call it? We fooled around. Oh. I don't know. I think if you get to orgasm, that's having sex. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. It's not having sex, it's having intercourse.
In 1997, Bill Clinton made it clear to Monica Lewinsky that their love affair had come to an end. A hurt and emotional Lewinsky poured out her feelings to her colleague, Linda Tripp, who had become her dear friend.
I can't take it anymore. Oh my God. It's too much for one person.
But in September of that year, Linda Tripp secretly began to record their phone conversations.
Put it in a baggie, you put it in a Ziploc bag, and you pack it in with your treasures, for what I care. I mean, whatever. Put it one of your little antiques. What for, though? I don't know, Monica. It's just this nagging, awful feeling I have in the back of my head. Well, I know that. I think it's a blessing you do, and it could be your only insurance policy down the road, or it could never be needed and you can throw it away.
And while all of America was preparing to hear these phone calls,
And the insurance policy was really important because the Clintons are known to knocking off people they don't like. You know, like the Whitewater incident. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the lozenges and the drops that I have. This is really important for the cold season. The moment that you start to feel, you know, some sort of irritation, you should be taking the lozenges or the drops. I have the lozenges in honey and lemon. The drops in honey and lemon, the lozenges in elderberry zinc, and the blueberry drops. But the moment you start feeling an irritation, take the drops or the lozenges. You want to get those secretions around that antigen that is causing that irritation. That will prevent a hypersensitivity reaction, and that will help to maintain the mucosal barrier and slow down the chances of getting sick. So it's really important to do that right away. And because these drops and lozenges have structural nanosilver in it, it will neutralize pathogens. So it's really important. I also have structural nanosilver soap. So please go to my store and take a look at the different variety of soaps that I have. Very high quality soaps. It's made from structural nanosilver. Please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com.
The property bubble in Southeast Asia finally burst. Everyone thought the world was becoming a more stable place, and it was because of the economic systems, the politicians, and the computers. But really, the two most uncontrollable forces known to man, lust and greed, were about to create two enormous crises that were going to send the world back into chaos. One would strip the last remnants of credibility and power away from President Clinton, and the other would see hundreds of millions of people suffer unnecessarily. The economic crisis began in Thailand. Hundreds of thousands of offices and apartments had been built, but no one wanted them. As the developers went bust and defaulted on their loans, Western investors panicked and rushed to take their money out of the country. The panic began to spread, first to South Korea. The impact was so disastrous there that housewives queued to give their spare dollars to the government in an effort to rescue their own economy. But it wasn't enough. The IMF swooped in and offered billions of dollars in loans to stabilize the country's economies. But there was a price. The IMF said that the reason the crisis had happened was not because of a property bubble, but was actually because the Asian economies weren't Western enough. In return for the loans, Asia would have to turn itself into an ideal model of a free market. This meant cutting government spending, getting rid of any remaining corruption and nepotism that exists within the ruling elites, and cooperating with America. Eventually, the crisis spread to Indonesia, which was ruled by President Suharto. Suharto was an autocrat surrounded by powerful advisors and family members, and he refused to do what the IMF wanted. President Suharto actually had the foresight to understand that he had leverage. And that was because the US and the IMF knew that if Indonesia were to have collapsed, the global economy would break out into complete chaos. So the IMF turned to the main man in charge, the US Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Rubin. As those in Washington panicked, Rubin's team began to argue that conducting a coup in Indonesia might be the only way to solve the crisis. President Clinton was now increasingly engulfed in the growing crisis over Monica Lewinsky, and enormous political power was being passed to Rubin and his Treasury team. They, and not the State Department, were now also in charge of America's foreign policy. In 1998, out of fear of being overthrown, Suharto gave in and signed the IMF agreement. Indonesia received a massive loan to stabilize the economy, and for a moment, it worked. But then something terrible happened. Indonesia's currency lost 80% of its value. The economy immediately collapsed as riots and looting broke out across the country. But Indonesia was not alone. In every country that the IMF had bailed out, like Thailand and South Korea, for a moment, there was stability. And then
number one rule, if you hear in the news that the IMF is bailing out a country, it is not to help the country. It is to bail out the bondholders or the investors in that country. 100%. And then over that little stabilization period, all of a sudden the economy collapses. Take my advice on this, and you're going to start seeing this, and you're going to see more activity of the IMF as these countries start to unwind their reliance on American treasuries or the currency. Because two things could happen. The IMF is a tool of the United States, and if these countries aren't playing ball with the petrodollar, they're not going to get World Bank funds nor IMF funds. So there's that mechanism. But these investors in these countries need the help. So they're going to be a lobby group forcing the United States to convince the IMF to provide the funds, which would happen, but there will be economic havoc with those countries after that money flows out, bailing out those investors. So if you hear something about the IMF bailing out a certain country, that is a huge warning sign that there are people that are in powerful positions in finance getting bailed out, and that country is going to fail economically.
Exchange rate collapsed. That is when the Asian countries, who transformed themselves as per the IMF's demands, realized something. America claimed to have been seeking global stability, but actually they wanted something else, and they had gotten it while screwing over the Asian rulers. Billions and billions of dollars had been paid out into the Asian banks by the IMF, but many of those same dollars were immediately used to pay off the Western investors who had lost money, creating Asia's property bubble. It was only after these investors had been paid back that the economies were poor again and began to crash.
The bailouts, the money from the bailouts goes to keep exchange rates at levels that are unsustainable. And when they're at that higher level, what happens is that people in the country use that to take money out. The rich people get their money out, leaving the country more indebted, but nothing positive comes out of that.
For the mass of the people.
For the mass of the people. Like in Russia, it's an extreme case of this, where the IMF lent over $5 billion in July of '98. The next day, that amount wound up in Cyprus and Swiss bank accounts. The people in Russia now have to pay the IMF back.
Yeah.
But what did the Russian people get? They got the exchange rate kept at too high of a level for an extra few weeks, which squashed their economy because they couldn't sell their goods and let imports come in more cheaply. Finally, when the money ran out in August, the exchange rate fell, and then they started to grow again.
This situation illustrated once again that the government's priority was to serve the interests of the financial community rather than the general population, a priority shared by the IMF under the UN umbrella. As the IMF was providing financial assistance to Western investors, taxpayers in Asian countries found themselves deeper in debt. In Indonesia, per the IMF's requests, the government subsidies were completely eliminated. Consequently, prices skyrocketed, and within months, in a country with a population of 200 million people, 15% of the working age men lost their jobs, and economic output declined by 14%. As Robert Rubin
Now think about
interrupted,
that.
Suharto
All this is
was-
happening. All this is happening where you still need humans to do jobs. Now imagine when you had the decoupling of labor and capital. Now do you understand what I'm saying? Now do you see the problem with artificial intelligence and blockchain technologies and digital currency and all this crap? You know, I don't know if I have a gene that in my DNA that is like the doomsday gene that you know that most people don't have, and I just can see this happen. I don't know. But the thing is that we're going off of a cliff here, right? And then you got the preppers that think that they're going to be able to survive this. And you know what? No one is going to be able to prepare for the economic catastrophe that could happen with the decoupling of labor and capital, because not only is it an economic catastrophe, but it's also it will lead to revolution. And that kind of revolution is going to be much different than what we had in 1776. It's going to be a modern day revolution that is more reminiscent of what was happening in France. And you're going to have the aristocracy getting in charge, right? And you're going to have these cycles of violence with the Third Republic and the Fourth Republic and the Fifth Republic and the 120th Republic and all this crap with France. It's an unstable country. It's not as stable as the United States, but you have all these things, all these warning signs that are happening. And so you got these preppers that think they're going to be able to survive it. But you know what? If the government is still around, that the government is going to take from you if they have to. So how are you going to stop that? You're not going to be able to stop it unless you have massive amounts of people that are willing to galvanize and stop the tyranny of the government. But with what happened in 2020, with the pathogenic crisis that we had, no one really galvanized to stop the tyranny of the government. What about the lost infamil that was taking place in 2021 and in 2022? Mothers didn't protest the government to make sure that they had enough food for their infant. They didn't protest for that. So you think you're really going to protest against AI and the decoupling of labor and capital, which is so kind of esoteric that most people, the average citizen, doesn't even understand what I'm talking about because they're not educated enough. Now it sounds that that I'm condescending, but the real reason why we are in these problems is that we have a citizenry that's not educated enough, not wise enough, and doesn't have enough bravery to protect constitutional freedoms. That's a fact. All you got to do is just look in the last 4 or 5 years of what has happened to this country, or even what happened with Lehman, or what happened with the tech bubble, or what happened with the never-ending war in the Middle East. The citizenry doesn't step up and stop the tyranny. And because of that, you're going to lose civil liberties. You're going to lose your country because you didn't fight when you needed to fight. You didn't stand up when you needed to stand up. And you got these people that think they can prep their way out of this. You're not going to be able to prep your way out of this, because there's going to be a group of people within government that will take from you, and there will be a group of people that are not in government that will take from you. So you're not going to be able to prep your way out of this. No person is an island. There was a time to fight the tyranny. That time is gone. You missed the boat, and people are going to have to suffer.
Power, but at a very high price. Millions and millions of people across Asia were now falling back into the poverty that just a few years earlier they had all thought they had escaped forever. In 1998, the Asian economies had completely collapsed in what was the most catastrophic economic disaster suffered by any country since the Depression of the 1930s.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Ms. Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong. It constituted a critical lapse in judgment and a personal failure on my part, for which I am solely and completely responsible. I misled people, including even my wife.
Bill Clinton had become the president with a vision of using political power to transform America. but he had been persuaded to give away much of his power to the financial markets with the promise that this time they would create a new kind of stability, a new kind of democracy, free of the corruption of political elites. But it was now becoming clear that America's political power had just been transferred to a much more secretive, much greedier type of elite, the financiers of Wall Street. And when the world was facing a crisis, they used their new power to rescue themselves. To the leaders of the Asian countries, this was just as much of a corruption of power as anything their governments were guilty of. And before our story ends, they would get their revenge on the US. While the experiment in Southeast Asia had failed, the Western investors had secured their money. And what now seemed far more lucrative than investing abroad was the opportunity to invest at home in America's growing technology industry. By now, California's vision of the future had captured the imagination of the whole nation, and the maturing internet was beginning to promise even more stability than computers had.
Bets.com, purely in an advisory role. I like your shorts. You're good looking fella. I hope they're home. Oh wow, you cats hit the jackpot. There's enough food here to feed a lion. What goes up? Try to get it. Try to get it. Try to get the burger. Must come down. Spinning wheel, round and round.
As the internet bubble began to pop, it became clearer than ever that no one knew what they were talking about. America's leaders kept promising stability, but it seemed as though all anyone could see was chaos. When the World Trade Centers collapsed, everyone had a sense that the world was about to undergo a dramatic change, but then it didn't. Surprisingly, everything returned back to how it was, and the hero who bent history to his will to ensure that was Alan Greenspan. A week after the attacks, the American markets opened again and immediately suffered the largest fall in history. 2 weeks later, the Enron scandal was revealed, and it quickly became clear this was only one example of vast corporate fraud that was plaguing the nation's economy. Since the early 90s, many major corporations had been faking their profits and hiding their debts with the help of some of the major accounting firms. This explained why Greenspan's reports showed no sign of economic development, yet earnings and profits continued to climb. Just as it seemed like the American economy was going to collapse, Greenspan took action. He dramatically cut interest rates again and again. His aim was simple: to encourage American consumers to borrow and spend. Just as they were in the aftermath of World War I, consumers and their desires were going to be the force that stabilized the economy. It was an enormous risk. By cutting the rates to almost zero, Greenspan was unleashing a flood of cheap money into the economy. In the past, this had always led to inflation and dangerous instability, but this time, it didn't. Instead, the largest consumer boom in history began, and to Greenspan's disbelief, it didn't lead to inflation. Everything remained stable, and the system was managing itself without drastic political intervention. Some believed it was a deflationary effect derived from the innovative computers. Some believed it was Greenspan's masterful intervention, and some believed that it was proof America was simply too big to fail. But all of these beliefs were illusions. The reason for the extraordinary boom was a giant exercise of political power by an elite ruler thousands of miles away in China. The Asian countries, led by China, had decided that never again would they put themselves at the mercy of America and the hypocrisy of their financial systems. After all, America had imposed the Bretton Woods system to its own benefit, only to abandon it with disregard for the rest of its members. They invested billions into Asian economies, only to steal it back when it was most needed. They had even retreated from the social programs that had once saved their own middle class, which would never again surpass its peak in 1971, as income inequality would only grow as a reflection that America's allegiances were not to stability for the rest of the world or even its own people. The only thing America cared about was money. So the Chinese were able to take advantage of this weakness and create a system to manage America. And through this system, they very subtly began to take control of the global economy. China deliberately devalued their own currency in order to keep their exports cheap. This allowed Chinese goods to flood into America and American dollars to flood into China. But instead of spending the money on their population, the Chinese leaders immediately lent the money back to America by buying government bonds. It was a perfect system of cheap goods and cheap money flowing into America, all controlled by the Chinese. This plan accomplished two things. Firstly, it would give the Chinese increasing control over America's debt and the value of the US dollar. America let this happen because it meant that their market could be filled with cheap, novel things that would only lend themselves to commerce and speculation. The second thing this system accomplished was it actually brought stability back to the world economy, until it didn't. The excess money China lent back to America motivated the banks to lend out money even more aggressively than before. For the first time, credit markets were being extended to the poorest and least credit-worthy borrowers in the United States. It was a mirror image of what the US had done in East Asia in the 1990s. And just like in Asia, out of this came a vast property bubble. It is as if over $1 trillion has been recycled, wrote one economist, to a third world developing economy that exists within America's own borders. The Chinese money had led America's banks into a dream world. But the reason no one ever woke up from it was because of their faith in computers. The computers had now almost entirely automated the decision-making processes of the financial industry. The machines were supposed to hedge against everything. In theory, this ensured that there was no risk. In reality, none of the bankers who got rich from these machines actually understood how they work. And then, in 2008, everyone's dream had become a nightmare. And just as in Southeast Asia, 10 years before, those running the financial sector mobilized the politicians to rescue them first. And just as in Southeast Asia, the price of greed would not be paid by the financial institutions, but by the unsuspecting taxpayer. Alan Greenspan's vision of a new planet turned out to be nonsense, or perhaps irrational exuberance. We are now living in a strange time indeed. We know that the economic systems from which we establish a sense of stability don't work. And yet, we cannot imagine any alternative. The original promise of the Californian ideology was that computers would liberate us all from the old forms of political control, and we, the people, would control our own destiny. But today, the opposite has come true. We all feel like helpless cogs in a global system, controlled by, well, at this point, it's not really clear.
So hopefully you learned something and a little bit of my take on this and how to apply some of the things that he was saying to our current situation. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the health supplements that I have. I have ebooks, and I also have lectures in pulmonology and immunology, only for $50. You can get a series of lectures and PDF files, all video files, and learn about pulmonology, learn how the lung system works, and immunology, learning on how the immune system works, just for $50, and help support my work. You start to learn something about how the human body works, and make sure you get the supplements that I've been mentioning throughout the video. It's very important to do proper supplementation, proper diet, exercise, stretching, challenging the mind, and you slow down the aging process. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting my work, and thank you, and please share the links, and thank you for the ones that have been sharing the links. Have a nice day.